Okay, Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. Welcome to Executive Talk webinar brought to you by Leadership Institute of Sarawak Civil Service. I'm Dr. Ayla Abdul Latif, your moderator for today's discussion, and it's great to host this sharing session. This session is conducted as part of internal learning initiatives and knowledge sharing to provide continuous improvement to the civil service sector by providing online platform for our distinguished speakers to officially provide valuable insights. And despite the physical limitation due to this COVID-19 situation, we are here today to discuss about sustainable development goals, its impact and relevance to Sarawak civil service. On behalf of the webinar organizer, I would like to express our gratitude to the presence of Yang Berbahagia, Dato Dr. Sabaria Putit, the Deputy State Secretary, Performance and Service Delivery Transformation, Mr. Ismail bin Said, the CEO of Leadership Institute of Sarawak Civil Service, Datuk, Head of Departments, Permanent Secretary, all CEOs, honorable speakers and all participants. Today we have about 120 participants across Sarawak, making this webinar a truly statewide online sharing. Okay, to begin with, without further ado, I'd like to invite Yang Berbahagia, Dato Dr. Sabaria Putit, the Deputy State Secretary, Performance and Service Delivery Transformation to deliver her welcoming remarks. Over to you, Dato.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayla. I hope you're fine this morning.
Alhamdulillah.
And the rest of you who are joining us this morning. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera to everyone. Yeah, of course, yang berbahagia Datuk-Datuk dan tuan-tuan, puan-puan, permanent secretaries, heads of departments, and CEOs from the various DLCs of throughout the state. Yeah, yang berusaha also Mr. Ismail Said and his team from the Leadership Institute. Yeah, our distinguished speakers this morning. Yeah, Mr. Ng Hon Seng. Yeah, glad to meet you on Zoom. And of course, Mr. Alan Sandosham, both from the ISHE. Do I say it correctly? I'm informed that it's that's how you pronounce it. Maybe you will tell me.
That's right.
Later. It stands for Health, Safety, Security and Environment. Yeah, it's apt for you guys to be around with us this morning. And of course, a very good morning and to all of our participants who has been very patient waiting for us to begin with. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe it is really my great pleasure that I welcome all of you to today's webinar on Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, yeah, and its impact and relevance to the Sarawak public service. Yeah. Everybody has been talking about SDG, and but now today we would like to see how does it actually has its impact and its relevance to the Sarawak public service, or Sarawak in particular. Yeah, I must say that I'm very, very grateful to Tuan Haji Ismail Said and his team. Yeah, from the Leadership Institute for their tremendous support and effort in putting together again another series of our executive talk. Yeah, in fact, I must say that well, this is an opportunity that we can reach out for more. Yeah, I believe also in this event, it's not just the numbers that log in. Yeah, but we have in the state. Yeah. Set up what you call that sites, yeah, to every department and agencies throughout the state. Yeah, in residence is also a district office, a site where we call it a seminar room or a conference room. Yeah, where one person can log in, but a group of employees, they are able to participate in the conversation. Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting journey for all of us through the new norms. In fact, to be honest, the last time that we have our IDEX International Conference, instead of the 2,000 people that we used to have yearly, we are able to reach out to, I think, 18,000 viewers. Yeah, that's how the new norm has actually enabled us to reach out to more people. Yeah, because through the FB streamings, live streamings, and also at the same time, we created more sites with our reaching out to every division through the residence office. Yeah, and we also able to reach out to our district office and also to our so-called digital community centers that we created to reach out to the communities themselves who are able to participate in actually this year's IDEX. Yeah? So all in all, our participation was more than 20,000 viewers throughout the globe. So I hope, in fact, the opportunity created come this pandemic has elevated us to a new platform. Okay, again, I would like to say a warm welcome to our webinar moderator. Yeah, first time I'm with you, Dr. Ayla Abdul Latif. Yeah, congratulations for your what do you call program in TBS VC.
Thank you, Dato. That's my pleasure.
Sorry, Mr. Ng and Mr. Ellen, we are excited about our new TV platform. Yeah, another TBS. Yeah, another achievement by our Chief Minister, kind of mandate that has been able to be translated to actually new platform for our creative industries and to reach out to the whole world. Yeah. And of course, let me, though I'm taking a little bit of your role, Dr. Ayla, I'm asked to introduce and express our appreciation for our speakers today. Mr. Ng and Mr. Allen have more than 20 years of experience in environmental consulting between them in United States and Asia Pacific region. That's interesting, yeah? You're bringing with us today your personal experience that is beautiful. These gentlemen have had direct hands and experience in supporting corporations and governments in the implementation of sustainability programs, yeah? Energy efficiency and renewable energy programs, compliance audits, supported the implementation of environmental programs, and conducted technical studies in air, water, and waste. They are indeed the subject matter experts. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for making time to share with us your knowledge and experiences. Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm also pleased to welcome you all to this SDG moment. Inspired by our aspirations to realize the state sustainable development goals by 2030. Yeah, in fact, our Chief Minister has actually launched what you call that, declare his the last June our post-COVID strategy with what you call data and innovation as the foundation for our data and innovation, and environmental sustainability as the foundation for all the sectors that we of economy in the state, which is going to be elevated to a digital economy. Yeah. So in fact, to be honest, YAB Chief Minister has started that movement since he came in, which is in 2016, and in 2017 he has already launched what you call digital economy strategy, yeah, come the pandemic, it's kind of a timely effort, and actually it could fast track and quantum leaped our initiative towards a digital economy and advanced economy through digital economy. Yeah, and I must say that in general, we are all conscious that the SDGs ultimately aims to end poverty, yeah, protect our environment, and provide a prosperous future for all. Yeah? Together, let us make this decade of action, a decade of ambition, a decade of aspiration and transformation, and a decade of hope and peace. Yeah, our aim through this webinar today is to share with you, yeah, despite the global pandemic, that the transformation is still possible, and it's happening right now in so many places with so many innovations and creations, and with the engagement of so many people. Yeah, and I do believe that God's willing, right? When the pandemic is here with us, it has what you call disrupt the whole what you call era of what we are doing currently, but possibly that creates a set of whole lot of new opportunities on a new platform. So inshallah, I always believe that the order of the day is that everybody and every one of us are looking forward into a future that we need to create together, yeah, for everyone. Yeah? And the state civil service must make tremendous progress over the coming decades, yeah, especially in the best interest of the most vulnerable of the rakyat in Sarawak, who have been adversely impacted by the pandemic. Yeah? But our task is indeed challenging for everyone, not just us, but throughout the globe. Yeah, the foundations of a country and the whole world, in fact, yeah, have been shaken by the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah? Societies and citizens are disturbed by the impact from the widespread disruption, and this makes one of the state civil service priorities in the COVID-19 recovery plans. Yeah? Done right, these plans can help us to transition to a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable economy. For us in the Sarawak Civil Service, yeah, priorities, the Sarawak Civil Service, the priorities has to be set, yeah, and this means expanding community protection, ensuring the rakyat access to essential services, and many more. Yeah, it means strengthening critical infrastructure like the access to learning and development, well-being schemes for the community, and internet connectivity, and not forgetting, yeah, this is the things that I believe that many has to really strategize. How do we actually build the capability of individuals and human as a whole, yeah, when their present skills are disrupted, the jobs they are having now are terminated, yeah, in a way you have to close that page, right, and you have to go to a new leaf and build the skills, build the capability to actually come to a new solutions. Yeah, and the state civil service is also aware that the public's desire for transformative change is growing. Yeah, and this is time that we cannot procrastinate. Yeah, when the public hopefulness for change is matched with smart policy choices, rapid progress can be achieved. Yeah. For the sustainable development goals to stand a chance, yeah, we must address the immediate, the medium, and the longer term challenges that developing our state and our people are facing. I always believe this, yeah. My gut feeling has always been there's also a long-term plan, but there must be the immediate plan and the midterm plan, because we never know. Yeah, when we have this pandemic, whoever thought that your 10-year plan are disrupted? You can have a nice, beautiful 10-year plan, but the immediate plan is to recover everyone from this disruption. So what need be done is what presently has been put forth to us. Yeah, what do we do to the current, to the present situation that we are facing? This needs an immediate. This needs reprioritization. This needs a strategy where you need to recover everybody for them to be in the comfortable, not just comfortable, platform where they're able to drive a new mandate, drive a new life, drive the whole organization and the what do you call the nation for that matter to move in a new direction. Yeah, right. As I said, I'm not here to tell you about why the impact and the realms of SDG to the public service, but I believe this very momentous morning, we have two experts who are going to share it with us. For that, I believe too, I would like to conclude. Yeah, cakap banyak saya, but allow our gentleman to share in a short while. Yeah, allow me to conclude, ladies and gentlemen. I really need your active participation, and I believe is important this morning. And this webinar too would function almost like a personal tutoring session with feedback. Yeah, so that's why, as I said, with the new norm, it's not getting a lesser, but a better, different way of communicating. But you can also ask questions and also personally engage, yeah, through the webinar. And all of this happens with the very large audiences all at once. The many things I have described here and will be discussed today are just the beginning. Yeah, I hope again as much as possible you gain and benefited from these sessions. And last but not least, thank you everyone, yeah, for this our honorable speakers, yeah, Dr. Ayla, our moderators, and Ismail Said with his Leadership Institute teams, all our all for those who are able to join us, yeah, permanent secretaries, Dato, yeah, and our heads of departments who are here today and their teams, and all learned those who are able to make their presence and participate from the various agencies, residents and district office throughout the state. Please do participate actively in these sessions that we have, and we hope you are able to provide input and feedback for us to be better and stronger in our new platform. We're able to move on, and thank you once again to everyone. Back to Dr. Ayla, please.
Thank you very much for the remarkable and meaningful speech, Dato. Okay, seems like everyone they couldn't wait to start with this session. But before we start, I think it's a good idea for us to hear a brief overview on what ICE Consulting Sdn Bhd is, related to their corporate background on the environmental consulting itself. Over to you, Mr. Ng.
Yeah, well, a lot of people confuse the name, how it is being pronounced. ISER actually is the way we pronounce it. Yeah, ISER. ISA ISA, but in actual fact, it has a capital E and small letter e, and then followed with HSSE. As what Doctor had mentioned earlier on, HSSE is basically the functions of our services, and capital E stands for Earth, basically means natural resources, and small little e stands for energy. The fact that the whole world is driven by either natural resources or energy, all the commercial activities. So that's the reason why the capital E and small little e has been captured in our company name. The company is rather new to the industry, but however, all of us, especially the partners, are coming from more than 20 years. In fact, Alan probably had 30 years of experience in consulting both in United States and in Malaysia. And I myself has about 20 over years of experience working in Japan, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. So that's basically the background of the company. We do made up of 6 partners. Some of them are with different, all of us are with different backgrounds, and we're serving mainly the oil and gas industry. And I myself has been honored enough to be the Secretary General of the Business Council for Sustainability and Responsibility Malaysia. That's where my experience probably working with the corporates on sustainable development goals would be shared through these sessions. And of course, Alan has many years of experience as well, right? Alan, you may want to go briefly on your background.
Thank you, everybody. I'm very excited about this talk. I've got a bit of a diverse background. I've lived about 20 years in the United States and worked in industry there. And I also had the good fortune to be the energy manager for a county in California, the county of Ventura, which is just north of Los Angeles. And so we started with putting in the first power purchase agreements for large-scale solar, and our prime mandate was to implement energy efficiency on the facilities that we own, which included jails and hospitals and administrative buildings and streets and land works and so on. So it was a very good experience. Energy also was responsible for the sustainability program and climate change response. So I came back to Malaysia after that, and I've been working with Eng and a few other people at a couple of major consulting firms. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Alan and Mr. Eng. Thank you for both the speakers on the short introduction on ISA's corporate background related to the environmental consulting. Before further ado, we would like to start with our first presentation, which will be delivered by Mr. Alan. So over to you, Mr. Alan.
Okay. All right. So I click the start presentation to launch it, right? Okay. Okay. Is it up on the screen? No, right? Okay, so start. Yeah. All right. Can you all see the screen? Is it showing up?
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to be doing an introduction to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals, and we strategized as to how to make this presentation. 17 goals to be done in in a couple of hours would not have been meaningful. You would have just got a few words on everything. So what we decided to do is give you a preview. We're going to give you a preview of the program and maybe talk a little bit about goal number 1, which is poverty. And then we hope you are so enticed and so excited that we'll get a chance to work with you on the balance of the goals and see where Sarawak stands and see how you can integrate them into your efforts. Okay. All right. So the first point on the agenda is basically a global overview of the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, the framework for people, planet, and prosperity. A little bit about the SDG governance status in Malaysia, and then Mr. Eng will take over and he will drill down more on the specific Malaysia programs and implementation at the subnational level. Okay. So as I said, we're going to do the overall introduction first. And as I said, we're not going to go through in detail and talk about every one of the 17 goals and each of the items within the goal. But we're going to talk about poverty and as the first one, because it's probably the most important one. So how many of you know this song? What's Wrong with the World, Mama? By Black Eyed Peas. Well, they really hit the nail on the head when they put this together, because we have some serious issues that have emerged over the last 50 years of development, maybe even 70 years since World War II. Right now, literally 26 people own as much wealth as 3.8 billion people. Can you imagine that? Less people than fly on a small propeller plane run the wealth of the balance of half of the globe. So this statistic has been cut in many ways. There are many versions of this, but this is the most dramatic form of that statistic. And this number, if you let it sink in, is phenomenal in and of itself. But in fact, the situation is getting more extreme. And there are all sorts of numbers on this that I could just keep spewing for hours. But since the last financial crisis of 2008, the number of billionaires and the wealth concentration has gone even more. And since COVID started, the wealth of the billionaires have even grown more faster than when everybody else has been losing. For example, Jeff Bezos has got about $111 billion. So if he just spent 1% of his wealth on Ethiopia, he would run their whole health program for a year. I mean, that's how extreme the wealth concentration is. Another statistic which you might know is that in the US, the stock market has been doing really well through the COVID. And the best analysis I saw about that was that if you look at who owns the stock market, pretty much the entire stock market is either held by institutions, which is retirement funds, or the top 10% of the richest people. So in other words, what's happening to the balance of the 90% of people is quite irrelevant to the stock market, because they don't really own any stock. The stock is owned by rich individuals, rich corporations, or big institutions. So the economy can go to hell, and the wealth is not changed in the market. So these kind of statistics are quite shocking. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the goal number one, the poverty eradication goal of the SDG, and we'll just kind of catch an overview of the balance of them as well. Okay. So the Sustainable Development Goals was officially launched to transform our world with a 2030 timeline. They are set up a very, very ambitious plan for people, planet, prosperity, with the idea of really capturing the bottom half of society as well. So they set up very well-defined universal goals for social, environment, and economy. Okay. So the way we look at sustainability here is not so much as a cost, but really as a way to respond to a changing dynamic in the world today. So, for example, climate change is a huge risk. You have 77% of people in Southeast Asia will be impacted by low-lying rivers that might be flooding. There are going to be huge economic disruptions, losses of 675 billion from drought, issues like that. But on the other hand, there's also great opportunities. I mean, the transformation of the energy industry could be phenomenal. There's a lot of investment that could come in. There's new jobs that will be created. So if we look at how we're going to use sustainability, we have to either decide that we're going to try to look at it as a negative thing and a cost that's going to be run, or we look at it from a positive thing and see how can we integrate value generation and wealth creation out of the SDGs. And I think that's one huge difference that I think the SDGs have come up with compared to previous similar goals that have been set up before. It's extremely integrated and covers a lot of aspects that have not been covered in detail in the past. Okay. Let's just take one of the variables that we need to manage. So this is a slide which you've heard a lot about. As I said, any one of these topics you can spend hours on them. This is a slide on what a small increase in temperature might do to different ecosystems. So for the warm water corals, which I know Sarawak has got beautiful diving near Sabah and Sarawak, a beautiful diving nearby. Just to 1 degree will have a very high impact. And basically, if you go to 2 degrees, you've really created a situation where corals will all start dying and bleaching out. So maybe on mangroves, that's climate change is not quite as big an issue, but fisheries certainly is. Terrestrial ecosystems, coastal flooding, river flooding, so on and so forth. So managing these issues will have to be done. If we don't do it, then basically we will be compromising some issues, and we can't stick our head in the sand to not say it's going to happen. Okay, so there are, as you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of talks like this about all the impacts of what could happen over the next few years, and we won't really go into them in this conversation. Okay, so we try to refocus back to the poverty and wealth generation, right? So another huge transformation that's occurring, and you already have seen it, is we have moved from the concept of wealth being generated by huge physical assets like big power plants and miles and miles of factory floor, to be basically value being generated from intangible assets. So I don't have the basis for this breakdown, but there's a components of the stock market have changed in the years from in 1975, when it was this is the US stock market. I don't have the similar data for Malaysian stock market, but I think it would be quite similar as well. Has changed from these hard, big industries with lots of workers and equipment dominating the market, 83% in 1975 compared to 17% smaller knowledge-based ones, to now it literally is the S&P 500 is 90% intangible assets and maybe 10% of physical assets. So if you look at the book value of a company, book value is the value of its shares outstanding, and you attribute to that book value, you go into the balance sheet and you see how much of it is physical asset, factories, or a building they own. That proportion is getting tiny. And as you know, big oil companies, Exxon kicked out of the Dow Jones, SAP, not SAP, Salesforce, a software company replacing it. Unbelievable. A software company that has no assets except for maybe some computers and some servers, replacing a huge behemoth, a company that was basically synonymous with the market. So things are changing very fast. Wealth is moving around very quickly. We can already see this in Malaysia. We can see the impact of cryptocurrencies and financial assets that have no financial backing. And we need to respond to that. And going back, recentering to the idea of poverty, who is able to respond to that market change? And do we have the right tools to do so? Okay. Again, I'm trying to throw a few ideas here together. So we have opportunities. Let's look at back to the energy question. So here is renewable energy penetration in Malaysia. It's very small. It's only about 6%. We have a target of about 20%. So I know Sarawak has got hydro, large hydro, and probably doing better. But this statistic, I don't know if it includes the large hydro component, which is sometimes not included in renewable energy calculation. But Thailand, Indonesia have got a little higher. And if you go to other countries such as I said, California is currently 33%. Of course, they are very lucky to have large deserts with solar photovoltaics on the ground, so they can take advantage of that. But their target is 50% by 2025, and they are on the path to achieve it. Green vehicle sales, we have a very small penetration. UK has got about 10%. there a question? Okay. And there are many countries, for example, that are completely banning gasoline engines in their city centers and are planning on phasing out the gasoline-powered personal vehicle entirely in the next decade. Green buildings, similar things. Green buildings are basically are supposed to be more energy efficient and have better use of resources, management of waste, and so on. We're very small, 8% of our building stock, and many countries have, or cities particularly, have been targeting much higher numbers. So there's a lot of opportunity for sustainable development activities and projects. Okay, so taking a step back, what are the sustainable development goals? So basically, 193 countries, including Malaysia, came together in September 2015, and we endorsed the SDGs. There are 17 goals, and each goal has got specific targets, 169 of them, and then there are also indicators for how we're going to achieve these targets. So they focus on things like poverty, hunger, food security, health, education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, economic growth, urban city renewal, responsible production, consumption, climate change, and biodiversity. Okay. So these SDGs are coming from the previous effort by the UN called the Millennium Development Goals, which ended in 2015. And the MDGs, some of you may have heard about them, were not quite as detailed and didn't have the build out, I think, that the SDGs have. So the MDGs were focused on developing countries. The SDGs are global. Many of the components of the SDGs are very relevant to developed world countries as well. Things like income inequality and so on are very relevant in many countries. Healthcare access, as you know, many big countries don't have great healthcare access, and we may have even better healthcare access than many countries.
Oh, ya kah? Nasa kena kita.
Okay, and as I said, the MDGs had 17.
Tadi dapat because number.
Oh. 21 targets versus 169 and 60 was indicators.
Display number of the.
So there was a huge degree. Yeah, there's a huge degree of disintegration in the MDGs, but here we're looking at no one left behind. MDGs developed primarily on bilateral funding, and here we're trying to find multi-level sources of funding. Okay, I think there is a background noise. I'm not sure if it's needed.
Just enable, disable this one.
Okay, thank you.
Tak boleh ni tinggal.
Boleh kita.
Okay. All right. Let's get on. Okay. So we are going to look at the 17 goals. We're not going to go down into all of these. But it's important for you to take a bit of time to look at these. And within each one of them, there are specific requirements defined. So poverty is the number one, to reduce poverty, or rather they say no poverty, which is ambitious. And in this poverty, for example, includes, I'm going to just go through a little bit of the specifics so you can get a sense of what these things include. Okay. So to achieve poverty reduction, we're talking about a specific target of not having people living on less than $1.25 a day, to reduce the poverty discrimination between men and women and children. Currently, there's most poor children or women. To make sure that there are appropriate safety nets for the poor. To make sure that people who are without resources, such as land rights, have given their own resources to strengthen their ability to manage their own futures, to provide microfinancing for people who cannot get access to bank resources, to provide cooperation to people in poorer countries, and also within the country to provide cooperation and support for people who are poor, and then to make sure whatever programs that are developed are gender neutral and do not discriminate against any particular group. So that's an example of some of the goals within poverty. So within hunger, there'll be similar goals that are defined, 5 to 10 of them. Zero hunger, good health means access to healthcare, access to vaccinations and medicines, preventative health, mental health, so on and so forth. Education, again, that's a very strong goal, at least primary education for everyone up to the age of 16, I think middle secondary. Gender equality, specific targets for political leadership to be of balanced. Clean water and sanitation has been on the staple for a long time. Everybody should have access to clean water and sanitation. Everybody should have access to affordable energy. And within energy, there's specifics as well. Within energy, there's specifics to try and move towards more renewables, to make sure that we also start promoting energy efficiency, and also to try and provide a mechanism that countries that are not as technologically advanced have access to the best technologies in energy, and so on. Okay, so industry and innovate. So then we have working environment conditions, economic growth. Very radically, the SDG does not discourage economic growth. In fact, they have a 7% growth target of GDP per year for the least developed countries, so that they have a chance to catch up. And also embedded within that is items such as child labor and so on. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. As we know, this is stuff related to transforming ourselves to be able to deal with the new economy, because economy is getting more and more efficient, and we don't need as many people on a factory floor. 100 people may be replaced by 5 pieces of machines, and how will that impact social stability? It reduced inequalities of many types, discrimination. Sustainable cities, as you know, the urban move towards urbanization is just unrelenting. And within a few years, I think the statistic is something like 90% of people will live in an urban or semi-urban environment. The number of people actually living out in agricultural lands is dropping in many countries. Even China has seen that huge change. India may be a little less urban but they're also getting very urban. Responsible consumption and use of resources. This is where we find all the things like recycling and plastics and circular economy. Okay, climate action, which we talked about. And then life below water, which is preserving our aquatic resources and our river resources. We've got huge problems with overfishing, trawling, and people eating off the top of the marine food chain, which affects the marine food chain below. So when you take the top predators out, like sharks and tuna, then you start destroying the food chain under it. Life off the land, which is basically agriculture, agricultural practice, industrial farming, and then peace, justice, and institutions. So having equitable access to justice, to having free and fair elections, courts that are outside of political influence, and so on. And then they've dumped everything that relates to how it's all getting done under Partnership for the Goals. So this is financing, institutional strengthening, resource allocation, what is the target development budget for a country, items such as that. So these are basically, if you don't have all of this, everything else will not happen. So the item number 17 is systematic policies. to make all of this happen, institutional support and so on, within the country and between countries. It also includes the classic management system philosophy of set targets, monitor your progress, audit your performance, and feedback the loop into understanding how you go forward with that. Okay, where you need to improve. Okay, that's quite a mouthful. But you can see it's a huge ocean liner of goodies that need to be done, and quite overwhelming, but very comprehensive, very detailed, and really needs a lot of planning and thinking to be implemented. Now, don't get overwhelmed. Don't think that this is not going to happen because it's too complicated. As Ng will talk about later, many of these issues here are already part of what we will call good governance, and so they will be already embedded in some programs that you have. So what we first need to do is basically do some kind of mapping against your programs and what's in the SDGs. And at a national level, that's being done already by the EPU. Okay, so and we'll talk a little more about that. Okay, so I think I've taken about 40 minutes already, so I need to kind of wrap it up soon, so you have some time for questions and the next speaker. So the big ways of breaking this down is three separate ways. One is the social programs, no poverty. I can barely read the slide, but I'm going to open it up on my own slide. Okay, zero hunger, good health, gender equality, quality education, clean water, then economic, clean energy, decent wages and working conditions, infrastructure, reduced inequalities, and so on. And then environment, climate, water, waste, land, and then governance. Okay, governance and implementation. So this is where we need to look at it in a big way. So lots of good graphics for that. All right. Okay. So the idea here is to kind of break down the silos, to break down the differences between countries, and to break down the differences within a country. It's also to have a more holistic view of what is sustainability, because I think people sometimes think, I mean, maybe you came to this seminar thinking, we're going to talk about environment. We're going to talk only about water, waste, and air. But you can see it talks about things like criminal justice, political reform, institutional strengthening our institutions, corruption-free. It also talks about access to food. Why do we not have food in places where we should? When it's a rich country, things like that are also defined. So they've done a very good job about being a collective. Okay, and details are very much flushed out, very well thought through. As I said, there's 232 indicators with 169 targets, and in policy-wide, it's a governance approach, not a silo approach. It covers all sectors. I don't think you'll find a sector of the economy that's not included, and it includes all peoples. It's not a one for the poor or just the developing countries. It's also got issues that rich countries are facing as well. Okay, I'm going to just go a little bit more into goal one. As I said, any one of those could be done in great detail, but we'll just do one. So as I said verbally just now, so the goal one has 7 targets, 12 indicators. So as I said, they have the target of $1.25 per day as a target. The indicator would be looking at the percentage population under poverty lines by age, by sex, employment status, geographic location, rural, urban. Okay. Target 2 is reduce by half the proportion of men, women, and children of all ages living under poverty. So then we have a statistic there as well we look for. And then as I said, there's also do we have adequate social programs and do we have floors? In other words, for if you can't slip through the bottom and be starving on the street in any country, you should have some floors where that you can't go below that level. And so, what are the systems? And do the systems cater to all categories of people, work injury victims, people who are sick, so on and so forth. Okay, so in Malaysia, we as you all know, we had a poverty line of 908, which was very, very low. This is a household income, not a personal income, and that was just recently raised to 2,208, which is much more reasonable. And I don't know if it's reasonable in a place like the Klang Valley or Georgetown, but I think it works for most of the country. And now we're looking to, well, with that rate being changed, so now we can relook at whether our programs are in place to make this happen. Do we have the right number of households that we're targeting to bring below the poverty? We're trying to reduce the number of people below the poverty line. Okay. So there are some statistics about urban-rural areas. So our situation has improved to 4.8 from 17.5 and 3.8 from 12.4 for the urban and rural poverty rates. But still, we're over 10%. We were over 10% for a long time. And I don't know whether these numbers are, how accurate they are. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about them. There's been a lot of controversy about how these numbers are kept as well. Okay, but there's a huge discrepancy between locations. So if you want to know where you stand in Malaysia, here is the household categories. So B40 is a group that is earning less than 3,169 ringgit per month for a household. Okay, and if you're making over 10,000, you're in the T20. So interesting information. And of course, if you've seen other graphs, they show that the average income as well goes up. Household income goes up with age. So if you're only 25 years old and you're in the B40, that's not really surprising. And if you're, close to retirement and you're in the T20 or M40, then that's not surprising either. So because the income tends to go up with age and then drops off as you hit retirement age. Okay, so here's the statistics. Okay, poverty levels. National poverty level is apparently 5.6%, and Sarawak, based on the statistics we have, 9%, not too far off the average. And Sabah, on the other hand, is 19%, and Kelantan, in Peninsula, has the highest poverty rate of 12.4%. Okay. So more to. So we in Malaysia, the dimensions here for poverty, because we've already had a program before this has been completely implemented. So I'm just going to talk about Malaysia's program, a multi-dimensional poverty index, which identifies multiple deprivations at household and individual health level based upon health, education, and so on. MPI is a poverty measurement in a broader context involving non-monetary aspects. As I said, health, education, amenities, and it reflects living standards. The value of MPI is between 0 and 1, where the higher number is a better number. Okay. So the MPI comprises of these variables in here. So in this case, deprivation, a higher number is a bad thing. So this is incident of household deprivation from 2015 to 2019. So children not in school didn't change very much. Household with a minimum of 6 years of education improved slightly. Healthcare access improved slightly. Piped water improved slightly. Conditions of housing actually went down, it looks like, when it became worse. Deprivation went up. More than 2 members in a family in a bedroom, that seems to have improved. No change or slightly worse in terms of flush toilets. Garbage collection improved slightly, so on and so forth. So we're marginally improving, but we're not doing the the huge leaps forward that we had thought we would. In fact, we are in 2020 now, and we seem to have been stagnant on our development goal for our vision 2020. We got derailed by a couple of things and really have not been able to come back on track. And I don't know what the statistics are going to be like with COVID, but I think poverty will definitely have gotten worse. Okay. So there are other issues within there, like the social programs that have to be available for unemployed, for pregnant women, for newborn children, for work victims, so on and so forth. We have to see how well that's being done. Let's see if we have any statistics. So I'm trying to. I think I'm going to wrap this up because there's a lot of information here, and really, as I said, it's more like a teaser for you to see how detailed these things are, and how do we actually take these very, very well thought through concepts and apply it to your department, your agency. Maybe your agency is in charge of transportation, so you have to look. Do we have accessibility? And don't think of accessibility just as do we have a road to the village, but how would somebody who's sick there be able to get access to healthcare in terms of need? Because that's another development goal. So you have to be integrated in all of these. So to kind of come to the conclusion here, the SDGs are critically important to driving successful transformation of our world at the global level. We need to have this in order to tackle some of the big picture questions. But it also goes down to the national level, state level, and probably down to local level as well. You can be implementing this at a city. In fact, some cities in Malaysia, Petaling Jaya and so on, are looking at the SDGs in their programs, and they've had programs like this in the past. Okay. So we have been committed to supporting the SDGs. We signed on in 25th September 2015. The EPU is the point of implementation, and the statistics department is in charge. Okay. So again, we already have the governing structure in place at a national level. I think Ng will actually go into a bit more detail on this, so we can talk about it. I'm not going to go through in too much detail now. So there's been an implementation plan, and this has been looking at prioritizing the SDGs to our 11th Malaysia Plan. Okay, so the coordination between the SDGs and the national 11th Malaysia Plan is ongoing. 11th Malaysia Plan, of course, is an ongoing effort. It's updated every year. It's taken very seriously. It's got our budget and everything coming out of it. So SDGs fit into them and get benchmarked. Okay. As I said, it's steered by the EPU, but there's a number of different agencies involved, including Ministry of Education, Environment, Health, and non-government organizations as well. Okay, so the way they're organized is into 5 clusters: inclusivity, well-being, human capital, environment, and economic. And each of the 17 SDG task force is led by a director or deputy director, or directly by the EPU. Okay. Okay, so we are trying to integrate all of this together, and maybe when we have a smaller forum as a workshop, we can actually drill down with some PowerPoints and talk in detail about how that is going to work and how that filters into what Sarawak is doing. Okay, so but basically, just to be aware that this is the implementation mechanism for the SDGs in Malaysia right now. Okay, so again, a graphic on where it belongs in the program. Okay. So these slides are a bit too small. So if we give you a chance to take a look at it, you can look at them in detail later. So Pillar 1, governance. Pillar 2 is the well-being and inclusivity. Pillar 3 is balanced regional development, and which ones belong there. Human capital, environment and green energy, and sustaining economic growth. So they've all been parked under various pillars in our 11th Malaysia Plan. Okay. So the SDGs have very many indicators. So not all of the indicators are going to be adopted. So some of them we have available indicators we can pull out and use. Some we decided are not relevant. Some we decided we don't have an indicator for it or not available at this time, 24. And some of them they were being developed partially or fully developed. So this is what it takes when you do like a management system approach. You don't just set up a goal. You have to track performance and close out achievement. Okay, very complicated graphic, but it shows exactly within each of those where the implementation is of the data. Some of it have very little data, some of it have got no data, and so on. But again, not intended to let you see this one by one, but just so you know the big picture on where this is heading. Okay. Okay, this slide didn't come out properly for me. Can you see the slide? Because for me, it's looking like it's shaded. Okay. I'm not sure if you're seeing this slide, because for me, I don't see it. There's way too much information here. Okay. Okay, I think I'm going to just wrap it up here. You see the idea here. I don't want to go down into detail, but basically all of this is being now integrated as well into the 12th Malaysia Plan, and which is currently under development. So it'll be part of your future as a person in civil service. You'll be looking at these coming into reality for you as well. Because at the end of the day, all these plans, all these indicators, all these metrics, they are not really national. Some of them have a very strong national component, but most of them, are implemented at state level. So the coordination between the federal and state is going to be have to happen, and I'm sure some of this is going to come into your portfolio at some point in the near term. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We have a session for questions and answers, so I think the moderator will go back to taking the floor and asking the questions verbally, right?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Allen, for the very good and meaningful presentation on the overview of sustainable.
Thank you.
All right. We have opened up the floor for the question and answer session just now, but we have a few questions from that been posted here. The first question is it's about what does no one left behind mean in the context of SDG?
Okay, so no one left behind means they are looking at the subsectors of society to try to make sure that there isn't a group of people that are left behind. In other words, that are not getting access to the resources that the national government is giving out. So, for example, if you had a group of people who are living in a unserved area, let's say up in Sarawak, let's say in the hills, in the mountains, they should have access to an education. They should have access if they want to go to university and they meet the standards that anybody else would want to, that they also can go. Or if you have a subgroup of people in living in a palm oil plantation, they have to be able to go to school, their kids. I mean, they don't really define what happens with foreign workers. That's a bit of a question mark. But the idea is that there should not be any segment of society that is denied the rights of citizenship and that denies the right to have a decent living.
Okay, having all that 17 pillars, 17 goals with all the targets and indicators. Why is the emphasis on leaving no one behind is significant?
Why is it significant? Well, I think the idea is that if you look at the first slide I had, the first information, right? We have got this. If society, and this is, I know it's a very political and very socially challenging question, right? But in our current system of governance, if we don't worry about distribution of wealth, the systems are set up such that wealth accumulation is the nature of where things are going to go. And it's not just Malaysia, it's every country in the world that has the system, implement as that wealth accumulation is going into the top tier of society. And with wealth comes access to healthcare and access to better education and so on. So the idea of providing healthcare, education, all of that is there. But if we don't worry about leaving anybody behind, it might end up that those systems are taken advantage of by only a small, by not everyone, not even a small fraction, but that some people don't get access to those institutions. And that is the fear of the SDGs. That is what we're trying to tackle.
And Dr. Ayla, may I just jump in?
Sure.
Yeah. Actually, from the UN experience in the past, especially managing MDG, one of the biggest setback of MDG was that a lot of targets are actually an aggregate number. Meaning to say, if, say, for instance, taking the goal 1 of end poverty, those are being looked into from an aggregate manner. In other words, there are segments of the society still were being neglected. Because at the end of the day, as long as the overall poverty, we're addressing 80% of the majority, then the target will still be met. But unfortunately, the 20% who are not being looked into are suffering the most. And that has been one of the biggest setback of the MDG back then, where the target was set at a very high level without the granular. And that's why in the current SDG, there are a lot more granularity in terms of the target and the indicators. The whole and the tagline for this SDG, learning from the experience of MDG administration in the past by UN, is really to make sure that even any segments of the society, especially the vulnerable and highly marginalized peoples, are being taken into consideration. That take into consideration gender inequality as well, especially women's and children's, even youth, as well as refugees. All this issue will have to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, imagine these are the marginalized people. They do not represent the majority. So with addressing them, we achieve target, taglines of not leaving anyone behind has been the key anchor for current SDG. I hope that in a way gives you some background of why this tagline came about.
Okay. What does success look like for the SDG number 1, let's say, at least in Malaysian's context, from what you have seen, especially during this post-COVID-19 circumstances?
Okay, that's a great, very, very good question. I think the numbers, I checked the numbers before I came on this slide. Before I came to this presentation, there's a data called the Gini coefficient, which is basically a ratio between the amount of wealth held at the top compared to the amount of wealth held at the bottom of society. And in Malaysia, actually, we're right in the middle. We're not as bad as some countries, and we're not as good as like the Scandinavian countries, which has got the most equitable distribution of wealth. So we're actually in the middle of that Gini coefficient number in terms of nations. So I think what is going on in Malaysia, what would success look like? I think there still is poverty. There is still poverty, especially urban poverty, which is ignored, and that poverty is got to be addressed. So the provision of meaningful jobs for youth. I mean, I'm asking you a subjective question, so I'm going to give you my opinion, a subjective question requiring a subjective answer. I think it'll look like basically bringing up the bottom of our society, which is the youth. There's a tremendous problem with underemployment of youth. And then, of course, as marginalized groups that are still living in the cities, in ghettos, in slums. I mean, there are very bad slums in Kuala Lumpur as well. Then, of course, there's been a lot of work done on rural poverty. I think it's improved a lot. But there's still, I think, rural poverty in some parts of Malaysia. Sabah's number is bad. I think those are some of the things. If you look at the programs we have in Malaysia that are helping, let's say, the Bumiputra community, I think some criticism has been laid that it's been helping the richest people and not as much the poorest people. So, maybe we need to relook at some of our programs to see if it's getting to the right person and help with the distribution of wealth. I think that would be some of my thoughts about where we're heading here. The other thing, of course, is we cannot defund things that provide basic support. The floor, remember I mentioned the word the floor. Mm-hmm. So the floor is things like healthcare. So there's been a disturbing reduction. We are not improving our budgets for our health ministries as sufficiently. This last budget that came out actually cut money for health, and that money that's going to health is helping the poorest people who go to public hospitals. There has to be continued support for education. So those are the kinds of things that where I think ending poverty would have a chance to make a difference in Malaysia.
No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Allen. One more question from the participant. How do you monitor the progress or impact of these 17 goals?
Okay, there's a slide that I had, and I basically, the government, EPU has already looked at these 17 goals and decided which of them they have metrics for and which of them they don't. So if you can see the slide that I have on screen, so there are 244 specific indicators. These are metrics, and for some of them, 48% of them, 118, there already are government indicators that are being tracked. So we can actually just see our performance. Some of them, we have 52 that we have some type of information available, but maybe we need to adjust it. And then another 38 where we have to develop it further. And then some of them we don't have at all, and some of them are not relevant. So we have to come up for the ones that are relevant. We'll have to flush out the indicators, but we seem to we're starting off with almost 50% of them available. So we're doing well.
Okay, that's the word. I think it's more about we revise and we prioritize after all this disruption, considering all the changes, and being flexible is one of the keywords in putting align our mission, our targets accordingly to the SDG. By the way, I would like to ask if any question from Dr. Sabaria. Okay, while waiting, maybe we have a quick one. I'm interested with the steering committee and the 5 cluster working committee given at the national level just now. How, in your opinion, how are we going to make it align with the departmental level, let's say for the specific agencies and state level departments?
Yeah, I mean, that's some of the discussions I think we've been having with Sarawak. I think the first task is like a mapping of how the structure of your departments are compared to the structure of the clusters, and see if there's where the mapping matches and where, where would everything fit into it. And once that's done, then drilling down and seeing within those departments what programs are currently there, and how those programs match with what the federal government is also planning. So it's an effort. It's not good. It's not something you do in 1 month. It's a multi-year effort to kind of build the capacity to implement these SDGs. I mean, the SDGs are going to be going on till 2030. So it's fully recognized that this is not a flash in the pan. It's going to be something that takes effort to implement, because you have to set priorities, you have to decide where you want to spend your budgets, and you have to see if there are some things you're doing currently that may not be the best use of your budget, and this, but maybe there's some other areas where you've not thought about developing this, but hey, this makes sense. So it's a big planning exercise. So, Eng might have some input on that because he's been thinking a lot more about it as well.
Well, I think from the steering committee as well, there are quite a number of layers of governance that we talk about, right? Ellen, would you mind to just go back to the slide where we show the steering committee?
Yeah. This one, right?
Go up a little bit. Yep.
This one or one earlier?
One more earlier. One more earlier. So there are so many layers of governance structure that has been already determined. At the top level, we are talking about the SDG Council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, and then we have steering committee chaired by the DG of EPU, followed with the working committees focusing on the 5 key elements such as inclusivity, well-being, human capital, environment and natural resources, and economic growth, under which there's workforce. So you're talking about 4 layers of governance structure that has already been defined in Malaysia. I think the way for the state to work with the federal government is actually to identify our advocacy. Where do we would like to advocate, in terms of the Sarawak context that would be relevant to SDG, and then you do not want to be, you want it to be at the national agenda. Those will be the one that you may want to map out and identify the relevant personnel to be recommended in those working group or even the steering committee. I'm not sure whether the membership for steering committee and national SDG will still be open, but I'm quite sure the workforce and the work committee, the 5 very much opens from my understanding. So by us engaging ourselves and advocating our own Sarawak context agenda, we would be. It's the duty of the chairperson for all the work committee to bring up to the steering committee on the concerns raised by all the members of the working committee. So that's where I see how the state government will be directly relayed back to the SDG governance structure that has already been defined.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Eng. That is, I think, mostly very clear for us to see visually the governance structure in Malaysia and how the roadmap is to ensure us to be tally with what we have planned at the national level. So maybe we should proceed with presentation 2 by Mr. Eng.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. You may start now, Mr. Ng.
Yep, sure.
Okay.
So sorry, I was I don't know why I was kicked out from the webinar platform earlier on. I didn't quite finish the discussion about how state government will be able to enroll yourself into the entire governance structure. So perhaps later on during my presentation, we will be able to get an opportunity to revisit the same issues again. Okay, my session is going to be talking about localization. While SDG, I suppose a lot of us had already had the ideas of SDG. Some of you may even have the ideas of SDG prior to coming to this webinar, and some of you may have just gotten some glimpse of understanding on SDG. Well, although like what Alan was mentioning earlier on, it looks very inclusive, it looks very expansive, and it looks very broad. It looks overwhelming as well, but when we come to the implementation, we should really be looking at our own functions, and we don't need to comply with all the SDG. I was once, because coming from my background, engaging with the corporates, there was one of the communication I have with one of the corporates. They are overwhelmed. They were saying, oh my goodness, there's 17 of them. How would you imagine I spending all my investment into all the 17 efforts? I think that's fundamentally quite different, from the expectation of the UN SDG. UN SDG would only looking at the relevant goals related to our own functions. Yeah, it is not as if expecting all of us to be complying, each function to be complying to all the 17 SDG. So but the key here is the granularity, how details, we need to know exactly what are the objective and targets, as well as an indicator, so that we will be able to align our activities along with the SDG expectation. So there are going to be two parts of my discussion today. The first part will be strictly on localizing of SDG. There are a lot of references already available by UNDP on how localization process can take place. I actually have modified those into the local context in Malaysia. Otherwise, it's quite global. I don't think some of those elements will be relevant to us. So I basically have modified it and make something that is more relevant to our Malaysia context. And follow with the second part of my presentation, whereby I'll be talking about some SDG. I wouldn't call it implementation, but aspiration of Sarawak that I have gotten. Bear with me because I have never been directly involved in any of the SDG strategization for Sarawak before. So I may fell short of some of the background understanding on how those SDG came about, and I definitely would like to open up that session as a discussion with all of you here today. Yeah. Well, this is the picture captured during the session SDG Summit 2019 that was organized by Ministry of Economic Affairs back then in the previous governments, and that was attended by the Prime Minister with a couple of senior ministers that are standing in the forums as well. And it was a 2 days long event whereby there are a lot of topics around SDG that has been discussed. And local governments is where a couple of sessions around local government. First of all, let's look at why state and local governments are relevant to SDG. Well, as I mentioned earlier on in responding to one of the questions here, SDG is not just about achieving a national average, but it's about ensuring that everybody enjoys the development gains. As what I mentioned earlier on, MDG setbacks was really the fact that it was looking at national averages, and that lack of a granularity, and therefore segments of the marginalized people would not be looked into. And that was exactly the reason why the SDG has set for itself an ambitious target to make sure that everybody enjoys the benefit of the development gains. In Malaysia context, states are empowered to legislate on matters related to land, public work, local government, agriculture, forestry, Islamic law, and public holidays. And in the case of Sarawak, you do even have a lot more power compared to the rest of the states in Peninsular Malaysia, given you are the equal partners into the Federation of Malaya. So this power that you have, does have a lot of direct impact to the achievement of SDG. And more importantly, I think let me quote the gentleman from South Africa Local Government Association was saying, local spaces are ultimately the key site of delivery and development. This is where all the activities happen, and that's why local government is central to the success of sustainable development. Yep. And last but not least, because SDG will be the basis for the future national plans. We have seen it in RMK 11. We have seen it in the current RMK 12 on the themes of shared prosperity. So moving into future, this is how the budget is going to be structured. This is how the future development is going to be aligned. And therefore, more so important for the state and local governments to stay relevant to the entire development future, in the entire future development of Malaysia by associating us with the SDG. So why does SDG matter to the local governments? A lot of the function you drill into detail, say for instance for SDG goal number 8, we talk about clean water and sanitation. Here, local government play a very important role in improving water quality through environmental protection measures and sustainable solid waste management. A case in point will be what happened in Sarawak. We have encountered water shortages, and the state government and local governments plays a very important role in ensuring. First of all, in the case of Selangor, it's all about the illegal operations of manufacturing facilities nearby to the river. Where is the planning process? Where is the enforcement process to ensure that all these potential sources of contamination are not in any way interrupting the clean water supply? And likewise for the landfills as well. I know there are some centralization and decentralization of solid waste management in the past decades in Malaysia. But coming back to Sarawak, solid waste management, from my understanding, is still very much a local government's matters. So how will all this landfill be managed? How all these dumping sites be managed? Will they in any way affecting the water quality? This is a day-to-day issues that are being handled by the local governments in Malaysia. And therefore, it is very relevant to the goal number 6. And likewise, it's actually for goal number 8 as well. When we talk about state and local governments, you are the one who are on the ground, knowing exactly the potential local economy development opportunities that we will be able to leverage on in harnessing the unique resources and opportunities in your territory. And therefore, this bottom-up approach will help benefiting the people at the local levels more so than from the federal government perspective. You know very well where would be the local farmers and how would they be able to sell their goods, and perhaps that's where the platform that the digital economy introduced will help bringing the farmers' goods, into the market as such that it will be able to sell in a regional basis or in the larger community basis. Those are the possibility that only can happen with the local government involvement. So these are only 2 of the examples of many, many examples how SDG will be relevant to the local governments. So when we talk about localization, it is defined as a process of defining, implementing, and monitoring strategies at the local level for achieving global, national, and subnational sustainable development targets. So if you look through the entire process itself, it's really a process where I would consider it a cradle to grave, whereby you are no different from the national governments. National governments go through a stage in which that they need to define the agenda as far as at the national level. And in your case, you are defining it at the subnational level, at the state level, at the local level, and implementing it. Of course, the implementation from the national level could be very different from the implementation at the local and state level. At the federal level, we are probably talking about a lot more policy and policy makings. At the state level, there will be some components of policy making as well. But more so than the federal, it will be on the implementing at the local level through projects and direct basic services to the community. And monitoring. A lot of people thought the monitoring of this strategy, the success of the strategies itself, will lies with the Department of Statistics of Malaysia. yes, Department of Statistics of Malaysia is the central data custodian for all the SDG related targets and indicators. However, at the local levels, the monitoring process by not just the local government themselves, but by all other stakeholders will be equally important, because all this data will be aggregated and represented as part of the data for the at the national level. So how do we localize SDG? I simplified it into 3 different components. First of all, we need to know who are our stakeholders. Remember, the entire SDG promoting multi-level engagement with multi-level stakeholders. So mapping and knowing who are stakeholders within the functions of your departments, including the government agency, private sectors, and civil society organization would be very, very important. I suppose a lot of us, would have already been running the function, operating our functions for many years, and that should be within your knowledge or within your reach already. And those stakeholders, many of whom you may have already been, building a relationship or rapport with, in the past. So mapping your stakeholders, if you have not done so yet, that would be the first step that you need to be doing, because the SDG emphasizes that we want to make sure that all the parties involved are being engaged. So the next, after we know about who are our stakeholders, will be raising awareness among the stakeholders. Yeah, they need to be giving access to a lot of information. As such, they will be able to provide valuable input into the entire decision-making process along the way during the SDG setting up of agenda. And last but not least, engaging them and collaborating with them in achieving the goals and target. So that goes with the first step in localizing the SDG. And secondly, we need to know what would be our SDG agenda. As what Ellen mentioned earlier on, SDG is not here to create another layer of management, but rather to internalize, within your existing function with the SDG elements into it. So we need to translate the global SDG into your function in a more in an ambitious yet realistic manner, so that it will be tailored to the local context within the function that you are running. And then it always start with existing function and map against the SDG. For instance, I'm with the Natural Resources and Environment Department Bureau of NREB of Sarawak. So there will be functions that I have already been performing, focusing on natural resources. So what would that map against the SDG? Is there any other, besides the existing function, we need to look into whether there are any other opportunities that allows us to exercise or implement additional SDG within the functions of my current mandate. And then last but not least, with the SDG goals that you have already mapped against, we have to understand in depth the targets and indicators associated with the SDG itself. And last but not least, come up with a plan. Yeah, come up with a plan based on a goal-based principles and for more sustainable social, economic, and environmental outcomes. Yeah, and then from time to time, we need to assess our capability within our organization in achieving the SDG and identify the funding gaps. So I think this is, in a nutshell, a very simple format in which that we should be adopting in localizing our SDG. I will go into a little more details on some of those other elements that I thought that would be relevant at the state level. So first and foremost, we've spoken about civil society organization plays a very important role in realizing our SDG aspiration. Why? I think SDG places a lot of emphasis for the CSO, because CSOs are being recognized as a voice of the poorest and most marginalized citizens. I think case in point during this pandemic situation, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the entire government is is coming out with all kind of measures to combat the situation. A lot of focus has gone into the frontliners, the healthcare industry, but to my knowledge, I first realized about the marginalized group and the B40 who are suffering a lot more during this pandemic was really through the CSO. I've seen a lot of CSO going out there offering food, offering shelters, offering basic services before even the government have been able to come out with the right policy and right packages in addressing their need. And therefore, coming back to the taglines of SDG, leaving no one behind, really is the underlying principle of SDG, because we aim to ensure that development throughout the countries has positive impacts on the poorest and most marginalized members of the society. And therefore, as CSO being the voice of the poorest and most marginalized citizens, they play a critical role, because they listen to people and they're aware of what is happening in their respective areas of operations. Believe me not, I believe a lot of you heard about, know about this Lorong Haji Taib, somewhere around, the downtown KL, yeah. For those of you who are not familiar with KL, this Lorong Haji Taib, is known to have a lot of prostitutes and drug addiction, and a lot of children are living around that area. These are the children coming born out of wedlock, and they are often the children of the prostitutes who are. Sorry, is there any questions? Yeah. So when the welfare organization from the ministry found it very hard to reach out to this group of marginalized people. And you know why? You know what? A lot of the local community, especially CSO who are operating in Lorong Haji Taib, for the longest time, has been able to reach out. And whenever somebody would deliver goods or basic services to the marginalized people in Lorong Haji Taib, they have to go to this CSO for them to be effective to deliver the basic service of basic necessities to these people. So because these are the people, CSO are the people who are operating on the ground. And with their resources, they can translate the voices of the poorest and the most marginalized citizens into rational and strong arguments that can be acknowledged and addressed by the local governments. So we need to see CSO as the resources for the governments. They are the people who are working on the ground, working directly, going through all these back alleys, to address some of the issues most critical to the local government. Besides, they also build relationships and partnerships with the local governments and other stakeholders. Although some may come across a little intimidating, but at the end of the day, they're trying to voice out. I think it's about how we would be able to moderate the situation as such to address the common goal, because the common ground for both the CSO as well as the state or local governments are to make sure these marginalized people are being taken care of. With that common goal, we should be able to address a lot more issues. By working together, we would be able to identify ways in addressing the problem. And also for CSO, they are often the most trusted people by the group of marginalized people. Yeah. Therefore, they play a critical role in training and advocacy process, which built the capacities and knowledge of the general population towards achieving SDG. I think the second roles of the civil society organizations will be, they are the agent accountability. So accountability, typically, we will look into three elements. The first is actually the responsibility. The second would be the answerability. And the third would be the enforceability. So what do you mean by responsibility? Responsibility entails that especially those people who are in position of authority, have a clearly defined duties and performance standard that enable a transparent and objective assessment of their behavior. So CSO know exactly the responsibility of the authority, and therefore they would hold the authority accountable onto their responsibility. Secondly, answerability. Answerability is actually the ability of the public officers, civil services, for instance, to present logical and articulated justification for their actions and decision to those who are affected. Say, for instance, you are making a decision to close down certain services. So, what is your justification and logical? Have you been able to articulate the justification appropriately, as such that the group of people who are affected by the decision will understand the basis from the decision? I think this is where the part of this is where one of the area where the civil services has been quite lacking, in terms of the public accountability of civil services. We fall short of coming forward and give a logical and articulated justification to all the decisions that we made. That often ended up in a situation where it make the whole problem worsen. Last but not least is actually enforceability. This requires the civil services to implement mechanisms that measure the degree to which you are abide to, the standards and enforcement sanctions, who do not comply when needed. All this will have implication on whether the activities that we are doing are being viewed positively. So enforceability means a fair applications of any of the standards, regardless of whether that's actually addressing the public or to the government's officials. These three elements of account, they are interlinked. Therefore, the roles and responsibility of the governments should be clearly defined, especially for the SDG. And also, like I mentioned earlier on, the dimension of answerability and enforceability are something.
Sorry, Mr. Ng. Can you hear us?
This is actually a snapshot of the Malaysia CSO SDG Alliance. This is one of the paper that have presented during the SDG Summit 2019, where there are a couple of major concerns that I have pointed out in the paper given during the summit itself. One is actually the CSO in Malaysia demand development are not based on charity. Charity could means it's not a random, or it's not a preference, it's not a choice, but it's based on the right-based framework. Yeah. So they would like to see the development are not being politicized. A lot of times in the case of Malaysia, we have seen a lot of developments being politicized, and they would like to see development to be a lot more structured based on the right-based framework. When they talk about right-based framework, CSO basically makes specific reference to the compliance to some of the UN's human rights declarations, such as UN Declaration on Indigenous People Rights and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Some of those UN human rights declarations are those that Malaysian had already ratified on, and we do have the obligation to comply. So, besides that, the local SDG Alliance CSO also demanded inclusivity and more realistic measurement of poverty. I think this is where the multidimensional poverty indicator that Ellen mentioned about came in. Because a lot of times the measures of policy given by the governments are universal. Yeah, are universal. A case in point would be the BPN. Yeah, Bantuan Prihatin 2.0. It was, there are household who actually have both earning a household of 4,000 ringgit, but one of the household with 6 members in the family and the other household has only 3 members in the family. Who do you think would be more severely impacted? Come the situation when we are encountering now with the pandemic. Yeah, who do you think would be the one affected most? This has not been recognized in the current system within Malaysia. So therefore, the CSO is actually is actually demanding for us to address the inequality by providing opportunity, not a one-size-fits-all kind of option, because they don't believe that this will bring results. Yep. The third demand by the CSO in Malaysia is actually to address the environmental justice and sustainability. There are a lot of concerns raised by the CSO that both the government services, as well as the private sector, do not fully understood the basic concept of sustainable resource management. Yep. So a lot of development models are biased towards profits and not consistent with the resource conservation. So areas such as wildlife crime, like poaching, illegal wildlife trade, illegal and unreported or unregulated fishing, these are all the issues that have been brought up as far as environmental justice and sustainability is concerned. Last but not least, the local SDG during the SDG Summit 2019 has also brought up the localization of SDG and the effective delivery of the SDG commitment. So they do recognize there are a shortfall at the state and local level in localizing the SDG, and they would like to play a bigger role as the partners to the state and local government rather than an advisor who are brought in from time to time. And they felt the important for them to involve throughout the whole process, from need assessment all the way to the implementation and monitoring of the indicators, rather than being engaged as a stakeholders during the stakeholders event. So that's where some of the requests by the CSO in Malaysia. We place a lot of emphasis on CSO. The reason I purposely structured our slides as such to make sure that we have some emphasis on CSO, because this is where a lot of the civil services are reluctant to engage. However, it is such an important element to the success of the SDG. In fact, SDG have placed so much importance to the role of CSO, to the point that they are bringing the CSO into the entire discussion framework at the national level. So at the state and local level, we just cannot, we just need to look at it as a positively. How will we be able to leverage our CSO in succeeding our need for implementation of SDG? So before we go into implementation of an SDG, I think raising awareness is equally important. Like the session that we have today is so important because it brings together all of us to understand SDG and how it apply in our day-to-day activities. Sorry, I can't see my slide. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slide?
Yeah.
But I can't, So what should I do?
Your slides are on, I think.
Yeah, but I can't see I saw a black screen on my slide, but never mind, I will just do it. The slide currently is on the awareness raising strategies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when we talk about awareness raising, we are not talking about building something new. We are not reinventing something new. We are talking about building on existing networks and organization, especially those that had already been involved in the earlier MDG implementation or the previous government processes. Yep. For all of us who are within the functions, your departmental function for that long, you should already knew who are your CSO, who are your stakeholders. Yeah, we need to build on those existing network and use the SDG as a fresh start to engage on broader cross-sectional stakeholders such as private sectors and community organizations to launch new forms of collaboration and participation. Also, we need to make sure that the SDG people and not one size fits all. This is what often the challenges that we encounter during any of these awareness raising campaign, where we have one set of documents, one set of material that are addressing to anyone without customizing to the local need and local issues that are relevant to the people. So that would actually we will not help in the entire communication process. And SDG, when we are engaging, we need to harness the power of local culture to bring in the people. Case in point would be what would be the local events, that would be most engaging in the local context. That would be the events that we probably would be able to leverage on in bringing SDG agenda into those events. Yeah. So let's make sure as well, because gender equality is one of the key big agenda as far as SDG is concerned. The gender perspective onto any of these awareness raising strategy will be very important. We need to make sure not just gender equality are being addressed at the campaign level, but also make sure that women and girls are not excluded in the entire engagement process. Of course, reaching out to the conventional media and social media through training activities. Our media need to be trained. Yeah, the journalists need to be trained on SDG so that they are aligned and so that there will be the voice from the governments reaching out to the public. And nowadays, especially with social media, more and more we see the social media influencers who can be reaching out to greater public and really have a bigger impact on the entire communication of all this SDG related communication. Education is an important link to the entire awareness raising strategies. It could be done both formally and informally. Yep. I do heard a lot of background noises. For whoever that have unmuted your line, can you please just mute your line so that it will be clearer for the rest of the peoples? Thank you. So we spoke about awareness raising. I think advocacy is another very important element in localizing SDG. I think the question earlier on, which Dr. Ayla was mentioning about how do we actually make sure we are engaged at the federal level. So that's where the advocacy comes in. Yeah, I think the state and local government, we need to participate in not just our state level SDG strategy. We need to define at the national SDG strategies as well. Well, I know that the initial engagement of the SDG at the national level had already been done, and therefore the SDG, the Rancangan Malaysia 11 and the 12 Malaysia plans are already in the way, are already being implemented. However, this is not a fixed implementation plan. From time to time, that need to be looked into. It's a very dynamic plan. So our involvement at the national level to define issues related to the state that need to be brought up at the national level will be important. And we need to advocate for national strategies to reflect the need and concerns of the local and regional governments and the stakeholders and the citizens within our territories. Of course, we need to gather information and evidence from different stakeholders to support the advocacy messages of local and regional governments. And let's also make sure that there will be an enabling environment at the national levels based on decentralization and good governance. I know decentralization is a very tricky word here. As far as Malaysia is concerned, we have a lot of powers centralized at the federal government levels. So decentralization, I know a lot of efforts has been done by the Sarawak governments into decentralizing the power back to the states, and that efforts from on the long terms, are very much aligned with the SDG aspiration. But of course, we need to make sure the good governance are in place at the state and local level when we are creating this enabling environment. I'm going to have some more detailed discussion about what exactly is enabling environment means later on in my other slides. And the theme to the entire SDG is all about promoting multi-level, multi-stakeholders partnership. So we should be recognizing all these different stakeholders. How would we be able to cooperate better for a common goal? Yeah. So that would be the basic principles as far as engagement with all these different stakeholders are concerned. So now let's delve into a little bit on the enabling environment for localization of SDG. I think first and foremost, we do need a legal and political framework that guarantee democracy and respect for human rights. And when we look at decentralization, we should be looking at defining the level of decentralization, whereby the local and state governments are given autonomous level of government with legal power, financial autonomy, and clearly define the roles and responsibility and capability to defend the voice of citizens before the national authorities. So this is quite unusual from our Malaysian perspective, given, like I mentioned earlier on, federal governments centralizes a lot of power within the functions. So how that aspect, given now SDG are promoting decentralization, what would that mean actually at the federal government levels? That will be an issue that we need to advocate during the advocacy from the state level. And multi-level governance mechanisms and multi-stakeholders partnership that will allow more trust on basically we're going back to national federal governments that, hey, trust us, we have multi-level governance that you should not be worried about decentralizing the power. And recognizing the need to make financial transfer from the central governments to local governments. Like it or not, all this implementation of SDG do require significant amount of financial aids, And as it is now, unfortunately, the fiscal and expenditure power are actually with the federal governments. Our state has very little limited extent of flexibility in the entire budgeting and prospect, So how do we make sure that this power of from the central governments can be delegated further? I think this is if that can be delegated, that would be the enabling environment that allow localization of SDG. And of course, with all this external environment being addressed, internally we should be looking at capacity building of the local and regional governments in relations to SDG by empowering them to maximize their contributions, even in the face of limited competencies, by looking into leveraging how cross-departmentally, horizontally within different regions, we will be able to leverage on the best practices as part of the capacity building are all very important strategies that we should be adopting to enable a conducive environment for localization of SDG. And yes, we've spoken about earlier on monitoring and assessment of a performance at the Department of Statistics level at the federal governments, But at the local and regional level, we should look at the capacity in monitoring and assessing the performance as well, With the monitoring and assessment, it comes with accountability and ownership of all the indicators that we are assigning to the local and state level. And we do need a national urban strategy, As what Alan mentioned earlier on, we are currently at about 70% of the population in Malaysia are living in the urban area. In futures to come, I think places like Kuching, Miri, or Bintulu and Cebu, these are the major city in Sarawak that would potentially expecting a lot more urbanization and a lot more population are attracted to the urban area. So with that, we do need a national urban strategy around those major cities. Here we basically have some new urban agenda. This is actually one of the UN program, whereby it actually gives us some detailed guiding principles into how to develop a national urban strategy for cities and metropolitans, so that you may be able to look into if you are embarking on such an exercise. So in a nutshell, from advocacy perspective, look at how we can actually advocate, and also what do we define as an enabling environment for localization SDG. So the enabling environment would be the aspiration that we should, at the state level, something that we need to embark on in order for the localization SDG to be more effective. So now, come to the implementation of SDG. Yeah. This is some standard process, which I think you probably had already been doing it at the state and local level. I mean, first of all, we need to know where our needs are to define the priority and look in localizing the SDG. And then we need to engage in cooperative governance to establish shared priority. Yeah. Because as we have seen in the SDG itself, as pointed out by Alan, earlier on, when he actually pulled out the goal number 1 to end poverty, we have seen some of the goal does not only lies with one particular government segment. It do actually involve a cooperative governance from multiple stakeholders, be it government agency, involving private sector or CSO, So all this need to be taken into consideration, especially when we are looking into the goals and targets specific to your function. Is there any other people that we need to bring in for us to come up with the cooperative governance that would actually ensure more transparency and accountability? And third will be aligning the local and regional plans with the SDG, which is quite straightforward. Alan mentioned it many times, mapping our local plans and regional plans against the SDG goals and how are they aligned. That's why the advocacy are so important. If some of the advocacy, some of the SDG are deemed to be important at the state level, however, it has not been taken up at the federal level, obviously the budget will not be allocated, and therefore it will be making the entire aspiration or SDG to be achieved at the state level for that particular goals to be a lot more challenging. And therefore aligning is actually a very important exercise. Mobilizing local resources to achieve SDG and making sure all of them has a capacity for effective and responsive leadership and promote ownership and core responsibility for the implementation of the strategic projects, and participate in the development, cooperation, and peer-to-peer learning. Here, I probably would have to skip a little bit on how to conduct a need assessment. This is something very commonly done, I suppose, for a lot of government agencies. Likewise, for the corporate, I basically borrow it from one of the corporate exercise. Actually, need assessment is actually a process where we go through, step-by-step process that we can go through. And currently there's no defined process or protocol as far as SDG implementation is concerned. But then data is very important in any of the needs assessment, because data will help us to understand where we fell short, so that we will be able to guide the discussion during the whole need assessment exercise. And then often I will start with the SWOT analysis, where we look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are related to the SDG that we are aspiring to achieve, so from which that we will be able to conduct the SDG. It is quite flexible. It is not just there's no standard tools around it. Yeah. So cooperative governance basically has a following mechanism. First of all, it's a multi-level governance platform to ensure coherence between the sectorial priorities and national government departments and those of local and regional governments. So they are multi-level, meaning to say not just state level, but the government levels as well, the federal levels as well. Inter-municipality, horizontally, we are looking about different state, different region within Sarawak. What would be the cooperation that we should be looking at, especially for those issues that are cross-border, inter-municipal, involve multiple municipalities. For instance, water resources management, or even does involve multiple municipalities. And peer learning and teamwork. Peer learning here does not only limit to Sarawak in the Sarawak context. There are a lot of advanced practices by other local governments within Malaysia, especially in Peninsular Malaysia, like the MBSJ, DBKL, that we should be learning how. What are the methods that have adopted and best practice that adopted that will help us to address some of the issues that are common to all. Yeah, multi-stakeholder mechanism, both formal and informal. Yeah, involving CSO, private companies, and academia. I won't go into very details on this one. I think this is quite straightforward. But the whole intent is actually to make sure that stakeholders are involved and their broader participatory governance. Yeah. So this is some of the steps that we should be looking at. One is, the local plan itself should comprise of, first of all, the diagnosis of the current situation within your territory, and some of the priorities that you should know in your day-to-day function, and what are the shared targets, not just within your own function, but shared targets across other functions, and coherence with SDG-based national plans. Yeah, if I'm with the agriculture department at the state level, what is the plan at the federal level? We should be coherent in that sense. Yeah, and then what would be the strategic projects that we will be able to maximize the achievement of SDG. Yeah. And of course the budgeting and financial strategies, how would we be able to close the financing gaps, and the implementation timeline and cooperative governance and mechanisms, and of course the monitoring and assessment. What are our indicators that we are trying to put forward as our target for those plans that we have put in place? I think these components of a local and state level SDG plan are very common to any of these plans that are currently being prepared, except there are a couple of elements such as shared targets and the cooperative governance are probably some new elements that we are talking about as far as SDG is concerned. But the rest of those elements should not be any stranger to any of us who have been in the civil services for that long. Yeah. So mobilizing local resources, we are not talking about just a lot of states and local level. We would have limited resources to as far as the SDG is concerned. My SDG is not about reinventing the wheel. Yeah, it's about doing your own function, but with the additional consideration on SDG. So we need to make sure there's efficient use of limited resources, aligning with the SDG priorities that we had already had. Yeah, and shared resources across state and local governments or federal agencies. Case in point would be for the monitoring of all these indicators. It is a massive exercise. Do we make sense to have each state or each local governments to have someone dedicated for that data monitoring, or should that be a state resources that we should be looking at, in monitoring those indicators and performance? Capacity buildings within the institution to ensure more effective use of available resources, and new partnership to mobilize resources by partnering with private sector, communities, and university and research center. Those are what we should be looking at. A new partnership should be looking at with the CSO as well. As I mentioned earlier, CSO are on the ground. So in some of the training and capacity buildings or awareness program, involving them would be a lot more effective based on my personal experience in the past year. And alternative financing, this is something quite interesting. I'm not sure whether that would evolve at the local level, because if we were to be looking at federal government to be allocating the budget, I'm pretty sure there will be shortcoming of there will be very short of funds to be cascading all the way down to the local level. So at the local government level, what would be the possible alternative financing option that we'll be looking at? In fact, I saw one of the very interesting project, initiative by Abang Joe, was about I couldn't remember exactly, but that was about like carbon offsetting. My impression is, Sarawak government is actually working with some private companies in planting trees as carbon offsetting options. I think this is a fantastic option because you're looking at generating income for the states and at the same time fulfilling, as one of the climate change actions, at the state level, contributing to a global fight on climate change issues. I think those are fantastic ideas. So alternative financing is something that at the state and local level we need to be looking at how best will we be able to finance it, given limited resources that we have at the federal and state level. And capacity building for effective and responsive leadership. I think this is quite clear. We are looking at capacity building. We are talking about there are a lot of transforming changes, that we are looking at, as far as SDG is concerned. So we do need empowerment of the individuals, leaders, and organizations and societies. I was just looking at some of the leadership attributes we have, dealing with changes or dealing with the expiration of SDG with the involvement of multi-stakeholders, be more inclusive, are really a little different from the typical conventional leadership attributes that we have been seeing. We seriously need to be looking into what are those leadership attributes that would best fit into the future, especially in the implementation of SDG with multi-stakeholders, multi-level engagement. Are our leaders, given that opportunity to build up their capability around those? I think that would be very important. Leadership is all it matters, for the success of implementing and SDG at the local and state level. And building in endogenous capacity within local and regional governments, from institutional building, policy analysis and development management, and also including the assessment of alternative options. Those are the aspects that we should be looking at, but also looking at peer-to-peer learning from different sectors, different team across the entire state and local governments. That should be what we can leverage on as well. Moving on, I still have quite a bit of slides. I'm going to go through it slightly quicker. So the next one is actually on the monitoring. I think monitoring is quite straightforward. Yeah, we are looking at collecting, analyze data at the subnational levels, develop a set of localized indicators specific to your territory, and participate in the monitoring and evaluation SDG at the national level, and promote the participation of other stakeholders to ensure that the information gathered at the local level is used in national SDG monitoring and reporting. I think those are, as far as monitoring are concerned. And I can't stress enough about how important is the monitoring of all these targets and indicators, because without knowing where we are heading, it will be very impossible for any of these state and local governments to be able to come up with the material projects or strategic projects that will be material to the achievement of SDG goals. So now comes the next slide about localizing SDG in Sarawak context. Yeah, this is quite new. I think in June, earlier on, I think Dr. Sabara mentioned about it as well, that our Chief Minister for Sarawak, Awang Johari, has mentioned during one of the press conference after chairing a state-level economic action council's meeting, that data innovation is actually the theme of how Sarawak will be achieving 2030, whereby everyone will enjoy economic prosperity, society inclusivity, and sustainable development. I think this is a catchphrase whereby three main pillars of sustainable development has been included in the statements given by our Chief Minister. And in the Sarawak Vision 2030, a renew aspiration, it will be emphasizes of 5 levers, which include a regulatory framework and policies, interagency alignment, data innovation, infrastructure and connectivity, as well as skill and entrepreneurship. And that will envisage 14 economic sectors. These are some of the initiatives. I've broken it down to different themes here. I think the most striking one is actually the 5th initiative, which talk about protecting people's right over ownership of land through recognition of native territory domain. I think this is something that I really have to commend the Sarawak governments, because this is an issue that have been repeatedly being raised by the CSO, as well as the external medias globally on Sarawak. So and the government had taken a proactive approach by looking straight into the issue itself and came out with an initiative on these very tricky issues of land to the peoples, which is very, I really applaud what the Sarawak government had done. The next one would be a lot of emphasis on economy, digital economy, which is very much consistent with Awang Joe's aspiration when he first took the office back in 2016. And then the subsequent one would be on education and human capital focus. Again, it's very much aligned with the SDG. And there are basic services and infrastructure focus initiative as well, which is again aligned with SDG. And they are also focused on social services. This is looking at empowering the youth and the youth and young families through the initiative 40 and 42, and environmental conservations as well as economy developments. And these are the initiatives that are looking into sectorial, such as tourism, agriculture, and housing. And this is B40 focus, which is quite a lot of them. Around 11 of those initiatives are B40 focus. And last but not least, these are the last 3 initiatives. Well, the fact that I don't have a lot of data to back me in terms of sorry. Oops, sorry. I don't know why I couldn't see the slide, but anyway, I've just quickly gone through some Awang Joe's 81 initiative. So the key point that I've seen in Awang Joe's initiative, of course, this is I would like to see this as a discussion because I do not have a lot of data that goes behind the 81 initiative. A lot of those initiatives are very much aligned with SDG goals. But I do see some of the SDG goals has not been mentioned, although I think it's quite relevant to Sarawak. In the case of Goal 5, for instance, gender equality, Goal 14, life below water, and Goal 15, life on land. I'm sorry for the fact that the slide had not been uploaded, as far as the localizing or SDG in Sarawak context is concerned, because we were prepared only last night. Yeah, my apology. And with that, that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I welcome any question and answer.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ang, for the presentation just now. I think it's very interesting for us to know that we should think of a fresh start. And in terms of localizing the SDG and effective delivery, it's good for us to think about the adaptation or adopting more detailed structural exercise in making things well designed. Okay, so before that, maybe we should, I would like to invite Dr. Sabaria for any question from her.
Thank you, Dr. Ayla. I don't mean to wrap up, but I believe that the two sessions has been very beneficial for us. And in fact, there are key questions, right? That I believe that we as public servants, especially in Sarawak context, where are we now, right? Key questions like, have we done the necessary alignment? I believe we do. Yeah, it's like Mr. What do you call Eng is saying, yeah, there are areas that maybe there are gaps, yeah, gaps, things like gender equality and so forth, yeah. But as you rightly put it, the Chief Minister has also raised some key concerns in areas that are what do you call very contextualized to Sarawak, particularly in areas of education, in areas of poverty, yeah. But there are key questions also for us in Sarawak Public Service. For example, our framework, each has, right, you rightly put it, are we facing it on the right framework? 17 SDG goals, what do you call, interrelated. Are we operating in a government-wide perspective, approach? Are we, our local government, I have always emphasized this too, our local government who are considered to be frontliners, and also our district office, which are considered resident in district Arando, they call it here, are transforming to actually embrace, yeah, embrace in the implementation exercise to reach, for us to reach into these SDG goals. Yeah, these are key questions that we should be asking ourselves, and particularly myself and my teams. Yeah, but as I said, there is big thing about evidence based, right? All this must be evidence based. Yeah, I just want to go to maybe this one has been raised earlier by Ellen. Yeah, I would want to go into a specific question which has been put in the slides. Yeah, can we apply the same PLI? You are talking about one size fits all, which is not really good in contextualizing your issues at hand and addressing it, because some people may be left behind. Can we apply the same PLI across states, urban and rural? Yeah, because these are key things now. I'm glad that the national should be putting in national urban poverty. Is urban poverty the same defined as the rural poverty? You know, and in addressing this is a very complex issue. It's not kind of, oh, it's stuck in one ministry and done, you know. So to put Sarawak also as the third in terms of poverty level, right, at 9%, right? To me, put it this way, again, one size fits all. It's for us Sarawakian, for me as a Sarawakian, I believe that we should fare better. So these are key things that maybe you can enlighten us on this one, yeah?
Well, you hit it on the nail, sorry, there's some echo here. You hit it on the nail. In fact, this is a contentious issues that have been discussed, on both the PLI and MPI. In fact, back then in 2005, yeah, the PLI are defined very differently, where we have one set of PLI for Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia, and then we have one set of another set of PLI defined for Sabah and Sarawak. In fact, Sabah has the highest PLI, if not mistaken, and then Peninsular Malaysia surprisingly has the lowest, and Sarawak just stuck in between the two, PLI. Until recently, the PLI is being defined very differently. there are a lot of comments about whether the PLI are really reflecting of the actual situation. Unfortunately, at the national level, as far as the SDG, they do have the whole indicator monitoring team are concerned. They're looking at one number, but it doesn't prevent the state from looking at your own PLI and your own MPI. Okay. There are a lot of confusion. There are a lot of in fact, the World Bank economists, were commenting that although the PLI has been defined at the national level for Malaysia, but they do not feel it's adequate enough. Yeah, even for the MPI, for instance, a lot of the factors that we're looking at, we are still very much benchmarked against the developing countries and not the developed countries indicators. So, well, mine is you can't stop the federal government from determining the PLI and MPI for the nation, because that is what will be tracked at the national level, representing Malaysia at the UN for the UN, but then at the state level, if we realize the PLI and MPI will in any way interrupt or affect the effective implementation of the SDG, then in this case, by all means, I don't see any harm of having us to define Sarawak specific PLI and MPI, so that you have a clearer understanding on what exactly are the poverty profile in your states, for you to be able to effectively mobilize resources to the pockets of community that are most needing that most needed that sort of assistance.
Yeah, it's of interest to me when you talk about urban poverty too in times of pandemic. Yeah, because sometimes you without realizing it, actually one of the key issues that we need to address immediately is about how do urban populace, in times of this pandemic, because of the density of the population, the living conditions, and this become a very critical thing. Of course, we want to decentralize so that people move to the rural. It's a long-term kind of. The current situation demands us to actually address immediately what do we do with this current population density, the issue of pandemic, and the issue of public health. I maybe you can elaborate that a little bit further. I think that's the two things I want to raise.
All very tough question, and a lot of dimension to the question that you just asked earlier on. Well, the current issues about urbanization and therefore higher density, and therefore more prone to the pandemic situation, more vulnerable to pandemic situation. I think from a state government perspective, some policies can be implemented as such to mitigate some of the issues related to pandemic. For instance, there are a lot of discussion around what can we do from planning perspective. What can we do from a building code perspective for us to reduce the impact of pandemic. So those are the possible options that a state government would be able to look into. Planning perspective, meaning to say that reduce the density of the population, and building code perspective, we'll be looking at what are the basic features that we should incorporate into the building itself as such to prevent or reduce the contact or reduce the exposure to pandemic. I think that's from the urbanization perspective. Decentralization, long-term decentralization, and what does it fare in terms of SDG? Well, I think SDG doesn't one way or another promote urbanization or de-urbanization in any way. Yeah, urbanization and de-urbanization is a natural process of need of humans need. And that's it. We cannot prevent it from happening. So so well, from SDG perspective, they do recognizes the difference between urban and suburban, and that would be an area that, from a state level, state government level, we should treat it separately, just like what Dato, you mentioned earlier on. The PLI level, which does not differentiate the urban and the rural area. A person with 2,000 something in the kampong, in far from the urbanization, would be very comfortable. But the 2,000 ringgit, saying 2,000 ringgit when we are applying somebody living in KL, that person cannot even support the basic needs for his day-to-day living. So the urban and rural aspect of each of these indicators are the dimension. To me, I felt the state government should be looking at when we are coming up with policies and projects, to make sure we are treating, using the same indicator, but treating it differently, not one size fits all. And we should not be overly proud or complacent with some of the aggregate number, because aggregate number sometimes can be misleading. Yeah. I hope that answered your question, because there's so many dimensions to the questions.
Thank you. Very well done.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dato and Mr. Ng. We want to proceed with a few questions, interesting question from the floor just now. The first question is about to what basic is most marginalized referred to? Is there any indicator?
Well, there are some definition of marginalized people, but yeah, they are mainly into even women, children, youth. Well, I couldn't give you the exact definition, but that they are being defined in the SDG itself. Yeah. Well, again, marginalized people may differ from one area to another area. So anyone who are deprived of the basic needs, yeah, or basic right, yeah, are the one to be considered as marginalized as far as definition is concerned. So it really depends on the situation. While there are some category of group of people that has been defined broadly by the protocol itself, but I think we should not be just referring to those people. That's why most of the reason we need to involve the CSO. For the longest time, I never thought that the stateless people would be an issue in KL, but only some of the CSO pointed out that, hey, you know what? There is a group of people who are the what do you call it, a B40. They are into the hardcore poverty group of people who are not actually who are stateless simply because they do not have the right education. So issue like that do arise, but are we going to be just ignoring these people and because they are not classified under the marginalized people within the UN Convention? No, we should not. So to me, I felt we should be taking the definition of marginalized people as the rule of thumb for us to define who are being considered marginalized. Yeah, people who are deprived of the basic need of services, people who are deprived of the right. Yep.
Okay. Acknowledging the.
Can I add to that a little bit? Because while you were talking, I actually went to the goal number 10, which was to reduce inequality. And there is a definition provided under 10.2, which says by 2030, empower and promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, economic status, or other status. Yep. So there is a definition in there, and Malaysia signed up to this. So this is the definition. But I think Ng's question also is that the stateless people and people with no who are illegal or like people who come here with no work, with no passport and are living here, they are becoming a bigger and bigger portion of our society, right? And they also have to be addressed at some point. So
acknowledging the of the CSOs just now, as mentioned in Mr. Ng's slides, they become the intermediator between the society and the government in the context of localizing the SDG in Sarawak context. How to make it, I would say, how can we make an arrangement systematically that would help us in terms of make it in a structural exercise that in detail guiding principle as the same like the the urban agenda. Maybe you can make it urban rural agenda based on the well developed countries.
So you're asking me, how do we engage the CSO in a more structured manner?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think I think the process of engagement with identify and recognizing them, identify who they are, recognizing their presence, and not to be biased, and put additional barrier between. I specifically want to emphasize on recognition. Identifying but not recognizing, doesn't help. So we need to identify and recognizing them, and then this. So that is one step by itself. Secondly, of course, it's about engagement. We need to define the level of engagement. I think this is where the contentious issue lies, with civil services, because there are so many. While the civil services, while the CSO always would like to have more transparency and more data sharing and stuff like that, but on the other hand, the civil services will be refrained from data disclosure at some point, and therefore, because they're bound by Secrecy Act and stuff like that, and therefore some of the information are being classified confidential, and therefore they're not being shared and stuff like that, So that prevented the free flow communication or knowledge sharing between the civil services and the CSO. I think where we need to make sure some common understanding is the protocol of their engagement, the protocol of engagement of this of CSO. While they will like to see the involvement at all stages makings at the local and state level, obviously there are some restrictions. So that process need to be defined clearly. Once that is defined clearly, once the identification and recognition of CSO are defined clearly, I think that would be the protocol that we can adopt in engaging with any of this CSO. One of the experience of mine in the CSO, because I do work for the government of Malaysia on a couple of those national studies involving around the conservation and stuff like that. One of the things that we need to ensure is actually a continuous communication with the CSO. So therefore, in the protocol of engagement, we do need to emphasize on the fact that it's just not one-off engagement, but people would like to see what's the outcome of the engagement itself, so that they are being informed of the decision and how do they arrive at that decision. I think this is where a lot of times we fell short of not getting back to them on the outcome of the entire engagement itself. So I think that in the nutshell, I basically summarize. I would like to summarize that into two. One is actually the identification and recognition of them. It needs to be a procedures, a process, a protocol that need to be defined. And the second one is the engagement procedures. Engagement in terms of decision making. As far as CSO is concerned, they want to be involved in all the whole process to be more transparent and stuff like that. So you need to draw the boundary between how. What are the information to be shared? What are the decisions that we need to get them involved? And eventually, the process of engagement itself need to be closed loop, meaning to say you don't start and without an end. You must start and end. Yep.
Yes, that means it's supposed not to be one-off. It must be by phases. Then, based on your answer just now, Mr. Ng, the
Yes.
last one, the very very short one, based on the national studies and your
Sure.
experience and background in these studies, which country actually is at the forefront in SDG 2030 implementation so far? Which country?
Well, we cannot. Obviously, if you were to compare with some of the developed country are on a different league altogether, isn't it? So if you are looking at the country at our same level, I wouldn't call ourselves developing country, and it's quite awkward. I don't see ourselves developed country as well. We are neither here nor there. I think Costa Rica and South Africa are quite good in the sense like they really have embedded SDG into the entire policy and programs. And I once saw a graph being plotted, because a lot of the SDG can be accomplished by economic achievement, But having said that, by doing economic achievement, it probably gives you a 70-80% of the achievement of overall SDG. There are still remaining 20 to 30% that would be relying on the social as well as environmental conservation. So they basically plotted the GDP achievement of this country and forecast it against all the way until 2030, and look at and also measure other indexes like social and environmental indexes. They found out countries such as like China, India, Russia are falling short despite their growth in GDP. Falling short in the sense like with that same level of GDP, they should have achieved more, but they do not, because they are not looking into the social as well as environmental aspect as great in a great scrutiny as what other countries like Costa Rica have been doing. So Costa Rica so far, based on evidence, that some of the study have shown, are probably one of the countries that are being highly looked upon as one of the SDG championing countries. Back to Southeast Asia, Philippines surprisingly are quite advanced in the SDG, as well as Thailand, are quite advanced in terms of the SDG. But Malaysia is not falling too far behind, especially from the corporate achievement. Malaysia is one of the Southeast Asian country with the best acknowledgement from the corporations that SDG is fundamentally changing their business model. In a lot of countries, in a lot of companies in Malaysia, way ahead of other Southeast Asia countries based on some recent statistic that I found. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, that is very helpful. The answer is quite clear for us to understand and believe that the sharing today has triggered our motivation, and we should start thinking where we can relate our current and future roles of sustainable development goals, and also reaching our potentials to the fullest. And thank you again for this enjoyable sharing. I would like to thank all our guests of honors and all our participants of this webinar today, and hope that we would start to work much better in line with our sustainable direction. By that will be the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much, everybody.
Thank you.